Lately, I was thinking about a trip to China that we made almost 30 years ago to a very, very different China from the one that I see exists today. We were waiting for our first grandchild to be born, and I had read a piece in the New Yorker about China in which they described the Yangtze River Valley as a place where a tenth of the world's population lived. And somehow that was a very compelling statement to me. And I had also gone to Fort Worth to one of the museums there, which was a venue for the Chinese warriors that had pretty recently been discovered, that were created by a Chinese emperor who burned down almost all the trees in northern China in order to fire the ovens that created these Chinese warriors. Anyway, for whatever reason, I thought it would be good to go to China. Anyway, we got to Beijing first, and Beijing had no cars, buses. It was just a completely different scene from what you see pictures of today. The pollution that you see was all from cooking outdoors. There was very little of, if any, manufacturing. The it was it was drab in every way. The only spots of color in Beijing were the children who were, you would see them being conveyed around in these curious vehicles that were like sections of football stadiums. They were risers, and so you would have 4 or 5 rows of 6 children each on this slanted uh, wheeled thing that they'd be pushing around, and the children all had these crocheted hats or knitted hats that had all sorts of color in them. And it was just astonishing to me how that was the only color. The other thing we noticed so much in the first few days, and the first few days were really difficult for me, the whole Western idea of space was immediately violated. Everything pressed on you. The crowds were like stadium crowds, football stadium crowds. The air was so polluted and so hard to breathe. I wasn't sure I was going to make it after the first few days. But the other thing we noticed was the incredible amount of laundry that was hanging everywhere, off balconies, between buildings. The city was covered with cranes. Building was going on everywhere. We stayed in a brand new Sheraton hotel that was one of the first high-rise hotels, and it was totally computerized. You could order your croissant in the morning from your bedside table through the computer. But out the window, you could see the streets being paved by hand with these rollers that men were pushing. The other thing we noticed, it was sort of a theme, was no cars, but the buses looked like those New Yorker cartoons where everybody is pushing somebody on and there are people lying down on top of each other. Well, they actually were like that, and very crowded. But the other theme on the boulevards, which they were contingencies of older people doing their Tai Chi or what early in the morning. The villages were like something out of they were a time warp. In one of the things that I especially remember was noticing a number of older ladies, very small, very tiny, hobbling around with a cane. And then I realized that these were the remnants of still living bound feet ladies, because I looked down and saw their feet were little knobs, and the cane was an essential.